6:04. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for showing up. It's so exciting to see so many familiar names of students we've been working with already for this cycle or in just general advising. I'm really happy to welcome today Amy, Angela, and Felicia to our panel. We had a fourth person, which I'm going to give Irma the opportunity to talk with, who had a family emergency literally just before this, so is unable to attend. So Irma, would you like to introduce Daniel real quickly, and then we'll go ahead and let the Amy and Angela and Felicia introduce themselves.
Sure. Thanks everybody for attending. Daniel Quintana could not be here to join us. Daniel has applied to MD and MSTP programs, which is MD PhD programs. He's been accepted to both types of programs. So he's been accepted to the MD and the MD PhD programs. Important for him to be here because he is a transfer student from a school in Southern California. So he did 2 to 3 years at junior college and came to Berkeley, finished up at Berkeley, and then took 2 years off before applying to medical school. If you are interested in an MD PhD program or are a transfer student, he has made himself available. Just go ahead and contact me directly at the Career Center, and I will go ahead and put the two of you together. He apologizes for not being here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll start with, go alphabetically. So I think that would be Felicia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Felicia. I graduated from UC Berkeley spring 2021. I double majored in MCB and nutritional sciences. And during my this past year, I have been working as a medical assistant and scribe at a private practice in East Bay. And yeah, I will be attending UCSF this fall.
All right, Amy.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm in New York City, so it's even later for me. I know Angela is also here, but anyhow, I also graduated spring 2021, and I double majored in MCB and art history. Currently in my first gap year, so I applied at the end of my senior year. For this past year, I've been a long-term intern at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the education department. So I'm happy to talk about kind of that really eccentric connection, or I would say like having both a science background and also a humanities interest. I'm happy to talk more about that. And I'm also attending UCSF in the fall.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angela. I also graduated spring of 21. I'm currently in my application year, and I'm in New York City right now, just as Amy said. I work as kind of like a patient coordinator at a pain management clinic, but I also have like a first job that I quit that was more like in kind of like sales and consulting. I am not really sure if I'm going to attend yet, just because I have an interview next week and I have a couple more schools to hear from. But as of right now, I might be going to Albany. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for your introductions. I have a list of questions I'm going to ask them. You're welcome to put questions in the chat, but we do have a pretty good number of good questions that will cover a lot of things you're probably interested in. So I'm going to start off with what extracurriculars, medically related volunteer or work, community service, research did you do, and for how long? Alicia, let's start with you again. Let's just go through the routine there.
Okay, sounds good. So my main, I guess, medically related work, I worked during my gap year as a scribe/MA. So I did that about 5 months before I applied. So I started basically like spring semester of my senior year. And then I was an SLC tutor for organic chemistry for 2 years. I was also doing research. I had 2 research positions, one at UCSF and one at Berkeley. The UCSF one is about like 2 years, the Berkeley one about like a year and a half, but COVID kind of put both really on the sideline really. So, and then lastly, I was a part of Suitcase Clinic for I'd say about like 2 years.
Great. Okay. Amy?
Yes, I had to look back to my application to kind of recall all the extracurriculars that I did, but I think the most important ones were I did 3 years of research at UCSF with Professor Huang in cardiovascular regeneration, so very wet lab focused. Did SURF and URAP. SURF is Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship, and so I did research for both of my summers, sophomore year and junior year. So for clinically related experience, I volunteered at the Children's Hospital in Mission Bay for 2 years. That stopped during COVID, and so I found another opportunity, which was volunteering with the crisis hotline at the Institute of Aging, which is also in San Francisco, but I was doing that virtually. And the crisis hotlines do count as clinically, medically related experience. At least that's how I labeled it when I applied. And I also asked a few people in the medical field, and they said it would count. So that's, I think, a good tip that some people might not be aware of. And I also, for volunteering, I started a club with a few friends. It's called CARE, which stands for Creative Arts to Re-Inspire and Empower, where we provided art museum tours that were tailored at BAMFA, that were tailored for seniors with dementia. And I did that for 2 years. And then lastly, I was a decal facilitator for 3 years, a decal called Social Medicine, and that was really fun. So that's it for me.
Good. All right. Angela.
For me, I think my app was very like public health and equity focused, and like also just urban health, because that was sort of like my motivation for doing medicine in the first place. So I did minor in global poverty and practice, and that really formed the foundation of like a lot of what I talked about, and also my motivation for pursuing medicine. I did like mental health and equity research from like the School of Public Health for a couple semesters. And my major thing was that I did Suitcase Clinic for 3 years. And even though it's not a pre-med activity, it sort of more formed like my service orientation and like my advocacy efforts. And yeah, just kind of like further form my foundation for like health and equity driving my app. And then I did a slew of other random things just because I didn't really necessarily know that I was going to do medicine in my first couple years of college. So I was like a basic needs volunteer for a while. I just worked at Poke Parlor, so like a restaurant, for a long time, and that took up a lot of time as well. I did like nonprofit consulting, part of like 180 Degrees Consulting. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go on a trip to the Dominican Republic and do some like physician shadowing abroad. And that really got me motivated because I was able to see sort of like this state of like global public health. So I feel like that's pretty much most of what I did.
Fantastic. I just want to say, listening to each of you having such distinct routes, I want to encourage everyone out there to continue following your own authentic interest and see that it does get you into medical school, right? All right, thank you. So next question, when did you submit your application? Alicia, we'll start with you. Do you remember way back then?
Yes, I actually like went back to just kind of find out as well. So I submitted my primary application on June 5th. I tried my best to submit it like about a week with within the application open or is open for you to submit. And then I started submitting secondaries around mid-July, and that kind of went all the way to the end of August.
Great, thank you. Amy, you remember?
Yeah, I also look back at my application for this one, but I submitted the first day it opened. And then it got processed on June 12th. So it took around 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks. And then I started getting secondaries in July. And it took me about a month to finish all of them. I did apply to 35 schools, so it took me a while.
And did you spend some of that time after you submitted your application pre-writing drafts for your secondaries?
Oh yeah, definitely. I actually remember you telling me this, Joe. You told me that there's a kind of a forum online. If you just Google common secondary questions, they'll all pop up. And I was just working off of those, and a lot of them repeated like from secondaries to secondary. So it was a lot of like writing about kind of that particular theme or question, and then trying to adapt to however, like the word limit, whatever the word limit was for every school.
Oh, good. And Angela, how about you?
Yeah, so I submitted my app on June 4th, and then the processing was complete like June 26th. So it took around 3 weeks to process.
Good. And did you start getting secondaries early in July?
I did, yeah. And I also prepared just as soon as I submitted. I just pretty much, I think that entire summer, I just kind of stayed with my mom and worked and wrote secondaries. And that was my entire life for like 2 to 3 months. So yeah, and can testify to the fact that you end up spending almost like half your time, I feel like, just adjusting words and making sure it fits the word limit. So yeah.
Yeah, yes. And Felicia, was that the same for you? I didn't ask you that at the time.
I actually didn't really pre-write secondaries. I kind of took a little break for myself after I submitted my primary app. And then like it was like 5 days before the first day secondaries were supposed to come out, when I was like, oh, I should probably start prepping. Definitely that's something that I regret a little bit, but yeah, I think it's okay if you don't pre-write like the entire essay. I feel like that might be a little challenging, but you can just start writing down bullet points of like ideas you want to write about. I feel like that kind of helps you like just mentally start preparing, and it makes it a lot easier to write the essays.
Right, excellent. Yeah, it's so true. So next question, how long did it take you to write your personal statement, and what resources did you use to help you? Go ahead, Felicia, since you're right here.
Yeah, so it took me exactly a month to write my write my personal statement. I used basically a ton of different resources. I first of all used YouTube a lot. I really liked watching YouTube videos of people just reading their personal statement, and also watching, I think I forget his name, like Dr. Gray or something, reviewing other people's personal statements. So that was kind of like my first like stop at like just kind of seeing a general idea of like what it's supposed to look like. And then I also definitely had a lot of friends and like family members read over my essays, especially those who like know me pretty well and like know my activities and like kind of like know my general reason of going into medicine. And also definitely like I had like 2 friends who were already in med school. I feel like their perspective was very valuable to me as well. And then lastly, I also asked my research mentor, and also I asked Joe and Irma to both read over my essays, and definitely that really helped me fine tune them as well.
Thank you. All right, Amy.
Yeah, I would say piggybacking off of Felicia, I also watched a lot of Dr. Gray's videos. They're really good, so you should go watch them if you don't know about them. His YouTube channel is called Med School Headquarters, and I literally recommend that YouTube channel to all of my friends who are applying to medical school. It took me, I'm a slow writer, so it took me, I would say, about 3 months to go from like start to finish for my personal statement. And even before that, I was kind of thinking about my narrative, because your story and your narrative is really important. So definitely spend time thinking about how to tie in all of your experiences together, and have a lot of people read your personal statement. I asked friends who, I was comfortable sharing, very personal kind of experiences, because I would say my personal statement was pretty personal, and you do want to find people who you're comfortable sharing that information with, and being so vulnerable with. And I also asked some of my friends who are in medical school, and some physicians that I shadowed, and also Joe helped a lot as well. So yeah.
All right, Angela.
Honestly, for me, I mentioned this very briefly, but I was so hesitant about medicine. So as a result, I just journaled about it like randomly when I just like had, I don't know, an existential crisis and was like, do I even want to do this? So like I think throughout like the past couple years before applying, I had just like had random moments where I was like, why do I want to do this? Like, do I really want to do this? What are some things that sort of like would fit for me in terms of medicine? And just through journaling and being honest with myself on paper, I thought I was actually able to use that as a foundation for my personal statement, because it felt really genuine. I wasn't thinking about what like admission committee members would like look at my personal statement or how they would think about it. And I think in that way, I was able to really keep like a genuine voice in my personal statement, which I think is like really valuable. I also think on like the more like, I guess, logistics side, I can't really tell how long I spent on it just because it was like a lot of like journaling and like pulling out like random drafts. But I will say, I think I spent maybe like 1 month or 2 months or so, just like finalizing everything. And in the meantime, I think it was really helpful to read other people's personal statements online. I even found myself reading just like random like undergraduate like college applications, and then I would read them and I would kind of like criticize them, like think about like, oh, how would I like improve this, or like what feedback would I give to this person, and do they sound genuine, do they sound like they're like actually intrinsically motivated based on their essay. So I did that. And then I also had people look over my app and edit it. But honestly, I feel like one piece of advice I would give about that is that if you have a ton of people read your app and edit it, you might lose your voice just because it ends up becoming so formal and so just sort of like robotic. And it just feels like, it almost feels like so many people are yours. That was no statement.
So your Wi-Fi is a little bit unstable, Angela, just so you know. You had a little freeze moment there. But anyway, just so you know. So that's great. So one of the things about just my little 2 cents is that, again, I think sometimes having too many people read it can make you wonder about whether you're on the right track or not. And like you said, you have to keep your authentic voice. With each edit, you have to really go, is this something that really is authentic to my own thoughts? So all excellent advice, and everybody's going to do things a little bit different. So the next question, and I think we actually kind of went over that, is pre-writing secondaries, and how long it took you to do that. So I think we already covered that. Did anybody know?
I have a question in the chat.
Okay.
That is for all 3 of you. What do you think was the biggest obstacle you faced when doing your application, and what were your recommendations be for folks applying?
Alicia, you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. Biggest obstacle, I think definitely, I think it's like something in general, not like one specific part of the application, but I think starting like the step, like taking the first step, like writing your first word for your personal statement, or your first essay for the secondaries. That was the hardest part for me. And I think I definitely got a little bit better, towards the end, but definitely I think that was something that I struggled with, for secondaries especially. But I think once you find your momentum, it actually gets much easier. The more you start writing, you get used to the prompts, you just get better at writing in general. And I also feel like for me, I feel like I needed like external motivation sometimes as well. I pushed myself to have meetings with Irma so that I make sure to have a draft ready for her by then, so that we don't waste each other's time. So definitely like finding motivation, pushing yourself to just really start doing the first, just write out anything you want for like the first rough draft, and it gets easier from there. Yeah.
Great. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, I'm a pretty impatient person. So it was the wait that was really, I think, was the most difficult part for me, although I wouldn't necessarily call it an obstacle. It's just personally, like for me, waiting to hear back from schools, and also just like getting waitlisted, getting rejections, that was really difficult. And kind of like searching and Googling things on Student Doctor Network and Reddit really doesn't help. So I would really try to refrain from that. It will be a lot better in the long run for your mental health if you're not comparing yourself to other people who are posting things on the internet. And there's just a lot of information out there. And so I would say to focus more on yourself and taking more time just for yourself, and not thinking too much about medical school during the application process, because what's done is done, and the ball's in their court. It's for them to decide. And so just, I think, letting go and not like holding on to it too much is something that is like one piece of advice for myself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I went down like pre-med Reddit like rabbit holes and like tried to like calculate my chance of like getting into like a certain school, and like what does it mean if they haven't gotten back to me in 3 weeks? Like I just felt like I was getting ghosted sometimes, and I would read into it. But I feel like, yeah, my advice for that is to just like know what you can control. Like think about just like what you can do and like try your best, and the rest of it is so random and it's so out of your control. I think for me also, honestly, my MCAT score was not that great. Like it was kind of mediocre. I had like a pretty bad summer when I was studying for it, because it was like the COVID summer and I was extremely distracted and like things were going on. So I think I was very anxious about applying as a result of that. And I feel like for that, all I can say is that I don't know. I think it really depends for each person, kind of like what they're comfortable with applying with. But I feel like just like know where your application does have its strengths, and don't sort of like underestimate yourself also, because I was honestly very surprised by the amount of interviews I got, despite what I considered like deep flaws in my application.
Great. And it's also true, each one of you. Thank you for that. So next question I have is, how many letters of recommendation did you receive first? Did you have any problems with receiving them? That is, did people write them on time? How did you decide who to ask? Did you use Interfolio?
Yeah, I asked for 6 letter recommendations. I didn't really have any trouble receiving them, and I did use Interfolio. So how did I decide on who to ask for? Definitely I know that you need like at least, I'd say, or it's recommended you get 2 science professors and then 1 non-science professor. That should generally like cover most schools' requirements. But I also wanted to ask some of the people that I worked with, during my extracurriculars who really got to know me for like a long period of time. So my program coordinator, when I was a tutor, she got to like, I worked with her for like two years. So she really got to see me, grow in college, and also my research mentor. So definitely it was very natural, the process of just deciding who to ask. And definitely with professors, I actually had a little bit of trouble just finding a professor to write a letter of rec for me, because it was during COVID and, I guess everything was virtual. So it was harder to establish kind of rapport and like connection with people over like Zoom office hours. So I'd say recommend people, especially if you're like lower classmen right now, like start planning ahead for professors you might want to ask, or like for classes that you want to ask, because I kind of pushed it back a little and said, oh, I'll wait until I'm in like upper division courses, and I asked professors then. But COVID happened. So definitely, if you already have a professor that you love or a class that you love, I'd say just start asking for letter of recs. You can always store them or ask them like right now, and then have them just submit it again on Interfolio like a couple years later when you're ready to apply.
I would say I had a really similar experience. Like it was, I think, I took a lot of humanities classes, so the humanities professor one really wasn't difficult for me. But I do know that for some, people might have like the opposite problem where they have like science professors but not humanities ones. But yeah, I do agree with Felicia, just going to office hours. And for lower divs, if you happen to do really well and have like established a rapport with your professor, then go ahead and just ask them for that letter. And I also used Interfolio as well. It's really helpful. I had 7 letters of rec, but I would say that it's actually, I really don't think it's necessary because a lot of schools only allow you to submit up to 4 or 5. So that just kind of depends on you. I made sure to get them in early. I would say, I would tell my professors or my volunteer coordinators that like this is the deadline. However, I would really appreciate if you could submit them like a month prior. And I would usually ask them like 3-4 months prior to the application and to the start of the application cycle, just because I am kind of a paranoid person and have had a terrible experience in the past applying to a summer research program, and my professor submitted it literally at the last minute. And so I just really wanted to make sure that that doesn't happen ever again. And so, yeah, I would say just go to office hours and really, for classes that you find interesting, ask questions. And also the other thing is that when I ask for a letter of rec, a lot of times I would create a document first with like bullet points of what I did with or that specific experience, or if it was a class, kind of talk about like what interested me the most and what I took from it. And yeah, if you're able to set up like a coffee chat with whoever you're asking that letter from, that would be even better, just so it's like more tailored to you and your experience and your aspirations.
Yeah, I have to ditto everything they said. Definitely ask as early as possible. And I was mentioning this in the chat, but I did ask a couple professors like at the end of a spring semester, and then they just became unresponsive, understandably, because of like vacation or like different issues. So I would just ask as soon as possible. I also would look into requirements for certain schools, because I didn't realize until I was applying that a couple of my schools required a positions letter of recommendation. That doesn't apply to many of them, but it did apply to a couple of the schools I actually really wanted to apply to. So I scrambled like super last minute to ask like this random doctor that I shadowed like in freshman year. And needless to say, it was very chaotic to try to get a letter that last minute. So I would definitely sort of like be aware of the different requirements because there are some like trickier ones for certain schools. Um, and I guess like a little bit more unrelated, but as well, when I was applying, I realized a couple schools actually required like an anatomy requirement, and just these like very sort of like specific details that I otherwise would not have saw. So I would definitely do your research, especially if you're excited about wanting to join certain programs.
And that's very true. Is different schools have different letter requirements. The MSAR is a good place to figure that out, to find that information. All right, next question. I think we talked about this, but could you just quickly go through, did you apply at the end of your senior year? And we already did that. So I'm going to go to the next question. How many schools did you apply to and how did you choose them? So Felicia.
I'll respond to Jason's question really quickly. I did ask my doctor who I was working for a letter. I'd definitely say that was my weakest letter because I only worked for her for like about 5 months by the time I applied. And she also asked me to basically draft up the letter myself. So definitely I would say it's not required at all for a letter from a physician, or I'd say like look up the schools that you are applying to. I think definitely some schools have different requirements. I'm like not too sure about DO schools because I didn't apply to any DO schools, but I think for most of all the schools I applied to didn't require a letter from a physician. And then I applied to 46 schools. It's definitely way too many. Looking back, you do not need to apply to 46 schools, but I chose them by really mainly looking at MSAR. It's basically this like database that allows you to look up every med school in the US and kind of compare the like number of accepted students from in-state versus out-of-state. And I really chose based off of location and then their like stats like MCAT GPA range. And lastly, like their out-of-state friendliness for schools that I was applying to that were not in California. And after I kind of like had this spreadsheet of like all the medical schools, I definitely consulted like some of my friends and also the career counselors as well, because they gave me some information about like some specific schools on my spreadsheet that, this information you can't really find online. For example, like some schools, they just don't tend to accept too many Berkeley students. So that was like some information that I got, and I definitely like thought about that afterwards. And realized, even though, I feel like other stuff matched pretty well between that school and me, I still decided maybe like to not apply.
How many schools did you interview at, Felicia?
I received 16 interview invites, but I only interviewed at 6 schools. It was because it was after I received an acceptance, and afterwards I just some of the schools I didn't feel like I would go over the school I was accepted to, so I decided not to interview there.
Yeah, for me, I applied to 35 schools, as mentioned earlier, and I mainly chose my schools based off of geographical location. I was mainly applying to East Coast and West Coast schools, so I applied to almost all of the California schools, except for one of them, I believe. And then, yeah, applied to a bunch of East Coast schools as well, just because I have some family here, and I'd feel more comfortable being like close to like having some family in the area. Yeah.
Right. Angela.
Yeah, I applied to around like 30 something schools. I think it might have been like somewhere around 35 as well. I also chose it mainly off of geographical locations, specifically big cities, just because like urban health and like urban health issues were like a main part of my app, and also just desire and background. Um, I did like a lot in California because I'm like a California resident, and I also did like some in New York, Chicago, and some other like big cities, Philadelphia. Um, and I really personally like wanted to look at the mission statement for schools too, because I wanted schools that had a huge emphasis on like community advocacy work, service work, and also just had like a lot of students smashing into primary care, just because that is something that I'm very much interested in doing in the future, and is also sort of like what my app supports. And I definitely did what Felicia said about looking at their sort of like out of state friendliness. There are some like schools in certain states like UW or like, yeah, University of Washington and some others around that area, like University of Oregon, that straight up only really accept residents in that area. And you wouldn't sort of, I mean, I don't want to say like guaranteed, like they only accept it. It's just kind of like a majority of the students that get in are from that area. And you wouldn't really notice from their website. But it was only from sort of like, I guess, doing my own research and like crowding through Reddit, that I found that there were some schools that didn't accept like out of state residents. So I would definitely look at that. And also one thing is that like schools really do like it when you have a geographic connection to them. So sort of like latching on to whatever you have to state that you do have some sort of familiarity with the school. What would be optimal is if you somehow had like a family member that went to said school. I don't have any like family members in healthcare. Nobody is a doctor from like who I know. So it is difficult to find that, but I know a lot of schools like really, really do look for that.
I just want to bring up here real quickly, the MSAR has that information on their first time matriculant data. So anybody who's applying within the next year should be signing up for the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirement side from the AAMC side. So that information is on there where it shows in-state acceptances and out-of-state acceptances, international student acceptances, so MD, PhD. So you really get to see that information there.
There is a cost for it.
Yeah,
so
cost.
just be aware.
Yeah, $28 for a year, but well worth it. All right, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt there. So next question. What were your interviews like? The other parts of that, how did you prepare for them? Were there any unexpected issues you faced with virtual interviews? Any unusual or weird questions? So Felicia.
Yeah, I prepared for interviews, first of all, by watching YouTube again. I watched a lot of just people talking about their interview experience, and also specifically like information on the MMI interviews and also like one-on-one interviews. I did a lot of practice with friends, with Joe and Irma, and also with family members. One thing that I really found useful, I actually basically, since my interviews were over Zoom, I recorded myself through like a Zoom meeting of just myself like talking about like answering certain questions. So I got to see what I look like from, the perspective of my interviewer. I really caught myself like just having lots of, different weird motions, and that I would say that definitely really helps. Also, another tool I used was the Big Interview website. I think it's free for Berkeley students. It's an online, basically like interview practice website that has lots of different like interviews for like whether you're applying to med school or law school or any, like honestly, like I think just like any kind of school, they have like a set list of questions and they have you practice in front of your computer, and they record your eye movements, your vocab, and basically give you a score at the end telling you, oh, you looked away too much, or you're using like too much. So that really also helped me kind of realize the word choices or just my eye contact. I also, for the MMI interviews, which are, I might be remembering this incorrectly, but multiple mini interviews where you basically like have different stations, and usually they are questions based off of like ethics in medicine and other sometimes like kind of random topics, honestly. I prepare for that by doing a lot of practice. I found like lists and lists of MMI questions. There are so many online, as well as reading on ethics topics. I know University of Washington has like their own website of a bunch of ethics topics, and they were really helpful. They also have like kind of practice questions at the end that helped you kind of just practice what you or utilize what you read and kind of practice. And lastly, I'd say podcasts are extremely helpful because I had a long commute to work. So during like my 1 hour, I would just listen to podcasts on different like bioethics topics that kind of gets your brain just thinking about these things and be prepared to kind of talk about it. And also Dr. Gray again has his own podcast, and a ton of other people have podcasts on how to prepare for MMIs or how to present yourself, how to talk about yourself. So those are all of my tools. I did not have any like really unexpected issues come up during my virtual interviews. Definitely MMIs were very challenging for me because you just don't know what to expect. And honestly, I definitely had like 1 or 2 stations where I felt like I really bombed, where I don't even remember like what I said because I feel like I just like rambled and try to talk for like 5 minutes straight. But my advice for that is MMIs usually have like 6 to 8 stations. So if you bomb one of them, you'll actually be okay, because they kind of bring together all your scores from each station. So if you really felt like you didn't do as well on one, just shake it off, move on to the next one, because they're all scored by different people and individually. Any unusual or weird questions? All of my one-on-one interviews were very, very, very conversational. I was always nervous before, but afterwards I always felt like, wow, I really love every school that I interviewed at, because the people who interviewed me, the med school students who had panels, everyone was honestly so helpful and just welcoming that I felt I really didn't have to be nervous at all. One question that I did get was kind of weird was the interviewer just kept on asking me why I wanted to come to their school, when I told him that all my family were based in the Bay Area and I've never lived, in another state before. And so he just kept on asking me and just making me wonder, why would I move all the way there? But so definitely research good reasons to go to a different school. That was just one incident though. So definitely I'd say it's not, I feel like all the other schools that I interviewed at that were out of state, they didn't ask something like that.
Great, thank you. Amy.
I honestly wish I did some of that, listening to a podcast, because I feel like my prep for my first interview was an MMI interview. And I think it didn't go very well. It was at Davis, for UC Davis. And they ended up waitlisting me. So I feel like it was the interview. But I also used the University of Washington, is that what you said, Felicia? That website with all the bioethics topics. That was really, really helpful. I used that. And I would say most of my other interviews went really well. They were really fun. They're pretty conversational, and it was just me talking to a faculty member or a student. And I feel like most of the time they were very generic questions, tell me about yourself. Oh, make sure you have the answer to tell me more about yourself and why medicine, especially why medicine. Why medicine is a huge one, and really nail your answer down before you go into any interview, just because they will ask you that. And I think for me, it was hard boiling down my personal statement into just a few sentences. So that's something I really tried, I would say, editing and working on. And I asked a friend who's in medical school and also a physician that I shadowed for. I asked them to kind of assess and just ask them like, how is my answer to this question? Because I know that everyone will ask me that question. So I made sure that, you know, it was as good as it can be. Yeah, I remember one interview where from Albert Einstein in New York. It's a medical school in the Bronx in New York. He asked me a question that was a little bit unusual. He asked me what schools I got into. And at that point, I had one acceptance, and that's what I told him. But I don't know. I'm actually going to consult Joe and Irma here whether that was like an appropriate question. I feel like you could say no in that situation because I don't know. I just told him honestly, and I don't think it affected anything. But yeah, that was kind of a outlier there, other than the other generic questions I received.
Sometimes they can make you uncomfortable. Yeah, Angela.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely rehearsed a lot with friends. I also did attend Joe and Irma's like virtual interview prep event that was held in the fall last year. And that was super helpful because I actually met somebody in the breakout room and we ended up like exchanging contact info, and we rehearsed with each other as well afterwards because we both had MMI interviews coming up. So that was really nice. In addition to that, I also like practiced with Joe like separately one-on-one, and that was also really helpful. For MMI specifically, I actually loved MMIs for whatever reason. I think it was just really interesting to think about like ethical questions and really wrestle with them. And I also did download this like free PDF of this one book called like MMI, written by someone named like Samir Desai. So I'm gonna drop that link to that book in the chat right now. And then in addition, I definitely also watched YouTube videos of other people interviewing, and I think that was helpful just to see what other people's like mannerisms, like tone, vocab was like. I also did draft very general responses to basic questions like why medicine, and that was helpful. That was definitely helpful. However, I think that when you draft these responses, it's important to not have like a super rehearsed and robotic answer, because they can definitely tell when you're like actually genuine and passionate in an interview, and to just sort of like read off a script, I think can really show. So I think I would advise against that. And yeah, I think that was pretty much most of how I prep for interviews. And I guess like for weird questions that might have been asked, I did have one really strange interview at a school where basically I immediately logged on, and it was like a physician that was email or interviewing me, that was a part of like the healthcare network within the school. And he immediately like looked extremely distracted, was kind of like looking between his different like monitors, and like it looked like he was checking emails. He got like a call like 1 minute in and answered the call right in front of me. So that was so strange. It was very odd. It seemed like he was like working a shift at a hospital because there was like a ton of like beeping going on in the background. And I don't know how common it is for something like that to happen, but I think I was really thrown off by that. And I think it definitely let me like get to my head, and my answers were like just very like mumbled and strange, and I just didn't know what to make of it. He also asked me like certain questions, kind of like, this is like for a school in Michigan, and I talked a lot about like my background growing up in like the East Bay and like my motivation for medicine, and coming from like a diverse community. And he was like, oh, Michigan's not diverse, by the way, like how are you gonna like it here? And I think that was just so strange for me. So I would definitely be ready for any experience that you might have, and just sort of have that like inner like strength to just get over it. And yeah.
I guess, yeah, just to add, sorry, the MMI question that I bombed was UCSD. But anyways, like the lady that was interviewing me, she basically looked very, you know, like, I guess just she had like a very like focused face, and definitely it kind of made me even more stressed out. And looking back, I feel like don't let the interviewer, their facial expressions or whatever they're doing kind of affect you. Just still kind of just focus on what you're saying, really.
Advice. Good advice, you guys. So last question, and there are some in the chat that I think we might want to address at the end here. But looking back, what advice would you give to those preparing to apply this cycle? You have a couple of things that you want to share about applying for students who will be applying?
Yeah, I actually kind of like jotted down some stuff I wanted to say. I guess the first one I already like talked about, but I think the hardest part is like starting. Like once you're all like, just once you've decided that you want to, apply this cycle, I think the hardest part is just starting every component of your app. Like for the personal statement, I recommend just really writing a brick of barf. This is something my English teacher from like high school told me for college apps. Is just when you just really feel like you're, when you don't want to write an essay, just write down anything that comes to your mind about the topic, and you'll actually find like some pretty like useful stuff in your, in your draft. And definitely like, yeah, you will gain momentum. You will become better at writing as you go on. So definitely don't be afraid to just, pre-write secondaries or start writing your personal statement. Another point I think is to surround yourself with people who really can support you and challenge you throughout this process, and not be afraid to tell you, oh, I think like this part about your app needs to be improved, or you could do better in like writing this component. My roommate was applying at that time, so we would just we would just have like nights where we just sat down and typed away for secondaries, and working with someone who's also, working on the same thing really helps you get in the zone, and you can always like help each other out. And definitely like setting goals for yourself. I find it hard, this is like almost like a year-long process. So setting basically like steps along the way where you achieve concrete goals. I thought that was really important for me. So then I made sure to have like meetings with the career counselors, with my friends, and make sure that I had like, I guess, dates where I had my drafts ready, so that the process goes by so quickly because you're just doing it one step at a time. And this is something that I actually like heard about when I was looking at the panelists from 2 years ago. This is something I definitely wish I did, but take notes as you are doing all of your experiences right now, because even though you feel like you'll remember, all these like very cool like experiences with like a certain patient or certain person, like, or like a tutie or whatever, you'll actually still forget some of that, and that feeling of like just or what you learn in that moment. So definitely like just have like a diary or a journal or just a Google Doc and kind of jot down certain very memorable experiences. That'll help you a long way when you're writing your primary app, where you will have to talk about each of your experiences. And lastly, again, I feel like this is a very long process. It's almost a year, and definitely enjoy every step along the way this process, because this is your last year before medical school starts. So definitely don't push off, prioritize your own well-being. My housemate and I, we were always like saying, oh, like after we finish secondaries, we're gonna go celebrate and hang out. But we kept on like pushing it off, because after secondaries, interviews came, and then interviews just keep on coming for months. So don't push off whatever you want to do. Really, this will be a couple of months, so definitely still prioritize yourself.
Great advice. Thank you. Amy.
I jotted down 2 points that I wish, or the first one, I wish I had known, and I wish I wasn't so like frantically nervous when, so basically it's more of a logistics thing, but when the AMCAS application, like before the application even opens, there's another date where it's like you're allowed to like submit your transcript. And I didn't know that it would take time for UC Berkeley to send the transcript over, it would take like a few days. And also once it gets to AMC, they need an additional like 2 weeks to kind of process your grades on their end to like verify, and they actually assign you your science and your overall GPA. So I would just say, like, when your grades come out for your last semester, like make sure to request a transcript like ASAP from Berkeley and have them send it over to AMCAS, because once like the application thing opens, it just, if you apply, basically if you submit like later, it'll just take like longer to have them processed. So make sure you submit your application early and request your transcript early. That's the essence of what I'm trying to say, just to like avoid some of that stress that I had when dealing with that, because that's something I wasn't aware of. And I feel like people don't usually talk about this. So yeah. And the second thing is for your activities description. Something that I personally did was, and I'm not sure if like it's if it's like, because I've heard different things. Some people say to just describe what you did for your activities section. Some people say it's better to include and incorporate some stories. And personally for me, I included some stories in my activities description section just because I thought it would be like more compelling and more exciting to read too for the admissions officer. So that's just something I did on my end. But yeah, those were the 2 pieces of advice I had for you guys.
Angela?
Okay, my first piece of advice is that I wish I studied smarter for the MCAT and that I took it a little bit more seriously. I know that's kind of obvious, but I definitely did a lot of like passively like writing down notes, just making like guides, reading through textbooks. I wish I did more active recall, for example, through Anki and using just like digital and physical flashcards. I wish I did more challenging practice questions. I was really cheap and I didn't want to buy UWorld, so I didn't buy UWorld, but I really wish I bought UWorld because they do have those challenging questions where you can like really like sit through and like learn from your mistakes. And even though they're more difficult than the MCAT questions, it does prepare you just for those like difficult questions. Maybe this might change based on the person, like in terms of like studying and how like you learn from studying, but I definitely would put in some like sort of like good thinking about like how you actually like learn and retain material, because I didn't really do that. So that's my first piece of advice, and to just give yourself a lot of time for the MCAT. So yeah. And then my second piece of advice, I think, is to not feel pressured to rush into medicine and do all these like certain activities, and overall just don't put pressure on yourself to do everything a certain way. For example, for me, even though I decided kind of late that I wanted to do medicine, I was always like, okay, I'm only going to take 1 gap year though, because that is kind of what's traditional and that's what's like set and what everyone does. And like, I wish looking back that I hadn't done that. I wish I'd given myself more time. I think I'd rather have like majored in like psych or soc or something, and just given myself also more time to do prereqs. So I don't know, just don't feel pressured. Don't compare yourself to other people and what other people are doing. I think it's so normal if you want to go down your own path and explore other activities. So yeah. And then I guess my last advice is just like a mental health note, and that the process is very hard. So please take it easy on yourself. Don't bring yourself down. And yeah, like, I guess don't compare yourself to others. I think it's really easy, especially online, to like compare like super specific stats and like get really into it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really affect sort of like how good of a doctor you're going to be. So yeah.
So thank you all. That was all extremely valuable information. All stuff that Irma and I both share with students if we get to see them and very true for what we hope for all students. We'll take that to heart. So thank you so much. Any other last minute comments or questions? Emma, did you have anything you wanted to share? Or?
No, we're it's 7:05, so I think it's, we want to be mindful of people's time, especially Becky's.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for attending. If you have any questions, we're always here to answer them for you.